Welcome back, folks, to the WP-Tonic interview show. This is episode 629. We've got a great guest. We've got McCarthy, Developer Relations Wrangler at Automattic. And the main title of the show is How to Build Real Community in WordPress. I'm going to let Anne introduce herself quickly, and then we'll go into the main part of this great interview. So Anne, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the tribe?
I'd love to. Name's Anne McCarthy. As Jonathan mentioned, I'm a developer relations wrangler for Automattic. I just started in this role in April 2020, right when the pandemic hit. So this is actually a very timely show and something that I think a lot about since I basically started this work and the job that I have now when COVID really shut down the community. So I'm very excited to talk about this. And as I mentioned before the show, I'm super appreciative that you do these interviews and that you create a space for these conversations to happen. So thank you.
It's very nice of you to say that, Anne. I much appreciate you saying that. You're a champ. Stephen, would you like to quickly introduce yourself to the new listeners and followers?
Yeah, my name's Stephen Souter from zipfish.io, soon to be actually hustlefish.com. So going through a little bit of a merger right now, which means my plate is really full of all sorts of meetings and fun things like that.
All right. You have to tell us more maybe after the show. You probably have to disappear, but we need to have a chat about that. So before we go into the main part of the interview, I want to talk about our great main sponsor, and that's Castos. Castos is, if you're looking to get into podcasting for yourself or for clients, it's a great platform for that. You need an RSS feed, you need somewhere to store your audio files, you need a lot of other small elements to make your podcasting adventure enjoyable, and Castos provide that. They also provide a great interface, a great support team. You probably know of Matt Medeiros of the Matt Report. He's their head of customer relations and happiness, and he's a great guy, a great support of the show. They're a great WordPress focused company in the podcasting space, so I suggest that you should go over and have a look at what they've got to offer and tell them that you heard about them on the WP-Tonic show. That really supports the show and the tribe. So, and maybe you could give us a quick background of how you got involved in WordPress, how you got involved in Automattic, and your semi-new role as Developer of Relations Wrangler at Automattic.
Yeah, so I actually originally started out using Blogger. That was the first blogging platform I used. And I used it to connect with a friend because AIM couldn't handle how much we wanted to say to each other. So we had private Blogger accounts. And when I went off to school at the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill, I needed a job. And there was a position open for an instructional technologist. And I interviewed with a wonderful man named Jeff Van Drimlen, who basically introduced me to WordPress. And it was my first remote job. It was my first job in WordPress. And the whole point of it was to teach professors and students and clubs how to use WordPress. And they were actually in the moment of transition away from other platforms to a multi-site on campus. So it was a pretty neat time. As a student, I always joke that I have 2 degrees. I majored in psychology, but then I got like a crash course in WordPress and multi-sites. And so by the time I graduated, I found out that UNC was actually a VIP client of Automattic's. And so some of my coworkers had an amazing meetup with the VIP team and came back, and I was about to graduate, and they're like, "Anne, you have to apply, like just apply to something there. You'll have so much fun." And I had no idea that the community existed. I had just gone to my first WordCamp then in 2013 and in Raleigh, and it was very small. Like I knew one of the speakers, which was kind of strange. Like it kind of was just more like a gathering of friends. And that was my first foray into things. And then once I joined Automattic, I kind of really opened my eyes. I think 2 weeks after I joined in 2014, I went to WordCamp San Francisco. And it was just like, what? I was like, it's like going to Disneyland. I was like, I didn't know. Like, I thought we just had like a stuffed animal of, a character, but like now to actually be surrounded by by everyone. I actually stopped Matt Mullenweg from going into the green room because I didn't recognize him. So it was kind of a funny experience to be around all those folks who made something such a, meaningful part of my time in college and in my own life, to actually meet those people in person. And at Automattic, I started as a happiness engineer on the WordPress team, and then moved into Jetpack whenever the products got merged, slowly but surely, and have kind of messed with so many different plugins at the company, from WP Job Manager to Sensei to Crowd Signal, previously Polldaddy. So I kind of had I was involved with the community in terms of how those plugins interact with the community space, but I wasn't actually in the community beyond just going to events, maybe representing Jetpack or volunteering. And so switching into this role in April 2020 was really exciting and like a big opportunity for me to take what I've learned from working with people across different time zones and cultures and products and actually go out into the community and, in my mind, give back so much of what I've been given. I really credit WordPress to changing my life in many ways. So it's been really a neat and fun role, and also a strange time to be doing literally a relations job whenever the main way that we would relate with each other through WordCamps and meetups has changed drastically.
That's great. Over to you, Stephen.
You mentioned like WordPress meetups and stuff, which feels like a very core aspect of what WordPress is, and how a lot of people got like introduced to it or like found that community. And a lot of those have stopped over the course of COVID and all of that. What have you been seeing like from the WordPress community? Like, how are people communicating, or like still building that sense of community, or is it something that's kind of just been put on pause? Everybody's been, working on their own code in their own rooms, and then everyone's just excited about the possibility of getting back out and showing what they've done over the last year and a half, 2 years.
Yeah, it's super interesting you asked this, because I feel like I almost had like a lesson in this just within Automattic itself, because we only see each other like once a year. So the second I joined the company, within about a month, I started a thing called like Automattic Life Chats, which was essentially pairing up people from across the company manually at the time to just get to know each other. This is when we were about like 230 people or something like that. And so throughout my time at the company, I've been thinking a lot about how do you connect people when it's so much easier to disengage. Like, we're all overwhelmed with notifications. We all like are trying to do our best and do work, we all have like loved ones that we're having to help manage, and like a real life that we're also building our work around. And I saw a lot of this at play with the community now. And the way I try to think of it is almost like, what's the opportunity with COVID? Like, how can we actually make our communities more resilient? How can we use this time to actually like not rely? So one of the things we talk about is like, don't rely on meetups to get to know each other. Don't rely on meetups to get the most work done. So like, how can we actually build that in when, for WordPress, the meetups and WordCamps, that was the staple, that was the backbone. What can we create now that even when we can go back in person, suddenly we're not relying on those spaces, and we can actually include more people, like as accessible as those events often are, especially cost wise. And sometimes they have childcare. They still are not that accessible to everyone. So I keep thinking about like, who else can show up right now that otherwise could not show up in these spaces? And for me personally, like one of the coolest things that I've seen is like the meetups that are just doing them online and letting anyone join. So I've been able to like travel the world from my, home and meet people from across different communities and jump in and talk about like full site editing or 5.8 when it was coming out, and actually connect with people that otherwise I'd actually travel to their place and meet them in person. And to be able to do that in groups of 10 to groups of 100 has been really exciting and cool. In particular, I love the mega meetup that folks in Florida do. I'm actually from Florida originally. I think that's a really cool model. So anytime you can join together. Within the WordPress space itself, I actually have spearheaded a couple different ideas. One is the outreach program for full site editing. And that's been like a really neat community space. And originally it was just supposed to be for feedback. So just calls for testing. But I quickly realized I really missed not the presentations. Like the presentations are great. And, you're like, you learn a lot and whatever. And like everything was going online at the time. What I missed was you're walking down a hallway and you bump into someone and you start talking. One of you pulls out a computer. Next thing you know, you're opening an issue. Like, it's like, I missed that. And so I started this like joking idea of like very casual, like grassroots, just hallway hangouts. And it kind of was inspired by some folks who I saw like streaming. I saw some teams doing, like the Docs team does a great like coffee break to get together, a coffee break, but it's basically bring whatever drink you want. And they just hang out and talk. And so running these like hallway hangouts from everything, like recently there was one on the navigation editor where they were comparing the old and the new. I'm actually running one tomorrow for the outreach program, going over like high level full sighting issues. And then I'm running another one with a group of folks on adoption pathways for full sighting. And it's like, and some of them are super formalized around a topic. Some are like, hey, I'm trying to build a block theme and I'm just going to live stream this. Like Helen did a really cool one around widgets. She also did one around block theming. So I love seeing that because you're actually able to have, without feeling like you're imposing, you can sit with someone for 3 hours and watch them like do magic, basically. Like watching Helen work for 3 hours, I was like, this is incredible. And I've watched and taken notes and written down all the bugs she finds whenever she does streams, which is always really fun. So those kinds of things make me really excited, especially because it's also recorded. Previously, those conversations with contributors were behind closed doors at dinners. Now it's like, oh, can we have these out in the open? And I think with 5.8, even the go, no go date and the demo that they did with, that was recorded with Matthias and Matt and Josefa and Helen, that's really cool. You actually get to see the guts of WordPress. And to me, all of this will make us more resilient in the long run.
Yeah, I really like that perspective because I feel like it's so easy for me to like get stuck into like what's changed or what's different instead of like what have we gained, and like just jump into this. Like there's stuff that's happened that is really cool that it never would have happened, without forcing everybody to be able to start using webcams and microphones, stuff like that. I mean, like me getting on the WP-Tonic show and meeting Jonathan was all because of COVID stuff, because you're out there making connections, reaching out to people that you normally wouldn't, because there's you're not randomly bumping into people in the hallway, so you just randomly bump into people online.
And it's
which is pretty cool.
and it's all been downhill since, hasn't it, Stephen?
Fair.
So I just want to put this to you, and I felt before COVID, and this varies because each WordCamp has its own personality to some extent, its own feeling, buzz, whatever word you want to use. But I feel it's like the Florida WordCamp or the Orange County or the LA or the Las Vegas. They all got a different kind of vibe. But in general, I think there were kind of problems before COVID, that the format was getting a little bit tired.
Yeah.
That you were seeing the same speakers almost at all the events, and getting more exclusive, more diverse speakers. It is difficult because we've got to face facts that WordPress is a highly developer dominated project. So diversity sometimes can be a bit difficult. Do you think there's any truth in my observation? And maybe you got some remarks before we go for our break, Anne?
I'm trying to think, because like I was always an enthusiastic participant. I've never actually managed an event, so I can't speak from that side. I can just speak from, I actually am also kind of a nomad before COVID. So they would send me off to everything because I have no kids, I have no pet, I have no partner. They're like, Anne, you want to go to this? I'm like, great. So I've been to a lot of different ones, and what you're describing, I think, is really interesting. It reminds me of Paul Graham has an article about like the message a city sends and how each city is a little bit different about what it values. And I noticed that with WordCamps, is like there's a little bit of a different vibe to each one. So it's a really good call out. I do think there are problems for sure. Like I think especially in terms of I hate to like use a very generalized term of accessibility, but like who can actually go to those and have time to attend, I think is really tricky. And then there's also like an exclusivity. Like I know personally, it's like, I didn't know the players. So like, it was one of those things where if you don't actually know people before you go, it's almost like summer camp. You're a little bit left out. You're like, well, everyone else has friends, but like, what about me? And I actually brought a partner to one WordCamp and she just had a horrible time. She did marketing at Google, very smart, had a lot to offer, and, couldn't connect with folks if she didn't know the words, didn't know there's a lot of layers there. And I think now with that being kind of shaken up, I'm actually hopeful that we'll see some of that shift. And I do think the diversity element and who you actually include in the spaces that you create, that is something I'm also keen to see iterated upon when and if we return, and what that actually looks like. Because I think there's a lot of folks who, I mean, speaking personally, I get really anxious about public speaking. I do not like giving talks. I get physically shaky, like it's not fun. But this format, easy. So I've given more talks I ever have in my entire life, and feel a lot better about recording them because it actually is way less for my mental health. It's way easier for me. You know, I'm not like unable to sleep the night before. And I imagine that's true for a lot of people. So yeah.
I think I've done a bit of public speaking, and you do get nervous, you know, but I like the buzz.
Oh, I do not.
I'm a strange mixture.
My dad's a public speaking kind of guy, so I'm surprised I didn't inherit some element of that. But
no, what I was going to say is I'm partly introverted and partly extroverted. I'm a strange cookie, which Stephen would testify. Yeah, I think most people at public speaking, they get nervous, but I like the buzz of it. You know, I like being on the edge. There's always been that little bit of edginess about me, which I kind of suppressed, but now I just wallow in it. I just accept that part of my character. So how are we doing for time? My clock has disappeared slightly. Where's my...
We're 20 minutes in, it looks like.
Yeah.
My time has disappeared. What happened there? Oh, it's come back. All right. I think we're going to go for our break, folks, and I'll sort out my technical problems, and we'll be back in a few moments, folks. We're coming back. We've had a great conversation with Anne McCarthy, Developer Relations Wrangler at Automattic. That's a mouthful, isn't it?
I know it is.
Even the title. Before we go into, you just listened to a advert for Launch Flows. I just want to say Launch Flows is offering a really great offer exclusively just for the tribe. If you go over to WP-Tonic newsletter, you'll be able to get a lifetime deal of Launch Flows with almost a third off. It's just a fantastic deal just offered to the tribe. So go over there and also sign up for our newsletter, our weekly newsletter, where you'll be told all the juicy bits from the bonus content of our outrageous WP-Tonic Roundtable show, the scourge of WordPress and many a tech company. So it's all good fun, isn't it? And I'm in the entertainment business, and for God's sake. So we were talking about, I think one thing that we didn't cover before we went for our break, and was also, I think there was problems about speakers and about the same people being almost at every WordCamp and getting speakers. I've really attempted to try and get more diversity on my podcast. I mean, you're part of that, and that real attempt to get women and more.
And it is intentional. It takes a lot of intentionality and actually meeting them where they are.
It's been quite difficult, and to get, I don't know, it's the lack of charm, but I would have thought talking to Stephen would have induced them to come on the show. But it's been difficult. And do you think the feedback that you've got from organisers and is it a general problem trying to get more diverse speakers and persuade people to come on things? And
I know right now a lot of it is, I mean, this has been like a well-documented thing. Like, let's just take like mothers or women right now. Like, they're, with the pandemic, a lot of times they were already taking on a large share of household duties, and now it's like even worse. And I hear this with coworkers. I hear this from friends. I've read articles about this. Like, it's very.
I'm sad to hear that in a way.
Oh, it's awful.
Because I come across the parts of me are quite traditional, could be classified as conservatism, whatever that is. But I believe, I lived in Scandinavia for 2 years. I dated a Norwegian lady for over 3 years, and I can tell we done the chores equally. You know,
They have a lot of equality. I have a little bit of Norwegian in me, so yeah.
But in some ways, it was a very traditional relationship. But when it came to chores, actually, you know, all the boring stuff, we split it 50-50. But you find you get a lot of feedback. I know, going off subject a little bit, we have to get back to it, but I thought, so you get a lot of feedback that affects their ability because they're kind of dumped all the responsibilities of the household, are they?
Yeah, it's a combination of that. And I also think the exhaustion of showing up in a space that's not built for you. Like, I know that's something that, like, I'm part of the queer community, so that comes up there is, you know, if you don't see anyone else who's LGBTQ, why would you, you know, you're like, okay, cool. This is kind of strange. So like, in core meetings and in core dev meetings, everyone reacts with like an emoji, and I react with a wave and like the pride flag. And I've had actually people reach out and say like, this is so awesome. Like, thank you for doing that. I didn't know there was something like that. Makes me want to join the meeting. So I think there's little things like that about, there's talk about diversity and inclusion, and it's like, diversity
there's a lot of talk about it, but
it's a lot of action.
Not too much action about it, is it?
Well, and I challenge people with, if you're having a hard time finding diversity, think about the space that you're creating. Like, think about how you're reaching out to people, because it's not just about pulling people on. It's like, what's the experience when they actually come? Because I can tell you, if someone has a great time in your community, they are going to tell their friends. And that is, it's just humanity. It's how we are. And like, if I know, for me, like, I've told a lot of queer friends who are in tech, I'm like, hey, the WordPress space is really cool. I actually was a part of a group that helped, you know, through Automattic, we sponsored like an LGBTQ meetup at one of the WordCamp USs. Like, that kind of dynamic where you can actually have these communities within communities, I think are really important. But it's also, think about inclusion first before you think about diversity, because I think you'll find it's really important when you do have people from different backgrounds on, that they feel really comfortable, and it's a space that's they have thought of them before they come. Does that make any sense?
Oh, totally, Anne, because, you know, I am a 58-year-old 6-foot English person. People, when they see me, and I'm quite a large guy, bone structure, so I've been told that I can be a little bit intimidating.
Hey, I'm 5'2" and I get called intimidating, so I'm just kidding.
Right.
No, yeah.
You don't strike me as intimidating. I think to myself, we all have these assumptions, don't we, Anne? You know, we just, and I think as long as we are aware of them and can consciously try and deal with them, they will always be there. That's at the core of us, isn't it?
Yeah.
But you know, I would hope people would treat me as an individual, Jonathan, and I would hope that people would treat you as Anne, and people would treat Stephen as Stephen, not try and just categorize us
in a box.
In a box, really. But it doesn't always happen, does it, Anne? So over to you, Stephen.
Yeah, kind of diving into this whole idea of community. I think in the WordPress space, I think like one divide that I think is interesting is like the WordPress Automattic people versus like the WordPress just developers working on the WordPress core or their own plugins or whatever. And I don't think that divide is like there because people are trying to make it there, right? There's a lot of effort to try to like bridge that gap. Yet it's still, I don't know, as a developer sitting outside of the Automattic world and looking in, like, it seems like a lot of people, you know, who are friends, having fun, developing content, working together. And there's always this kind of feeling of like distance looking in, not that like I'm not being invited, and it's just we're in different worlds and different places. And there's always like this apprehension, like what's Automattic going to do next? What's going to happen? Where are things going? Because that directly impacts what I'm working on, right? Like the code that I wrote, you know, 2 years ago might have to get rewritten, but for oftentimes good reasons, right? Like the platform is progressing and stuff. But like I know what that feels like, but like from your point of view, what does it look like to be on the Automattic side and looking out at all of us crazy developers kind of doing our
Oh,
own things that
man.
have really strong opinions about, how things should be.
Yeah. Well, for starters, I do want to extend an offer. Like I'm at Anzazu. I'm WordPress org Slack. I'm not on Twitter. I'm like the worst millennial. I'm not on any social media right now. But nomad.blog is my site. There's a contact form. Like if you resonate with what Stephen's describing, like please reach out because I would love to help get inroads. Like I think that's one of the things that I've started doing since I joined. I actually have this whole handbook page on navigating the community and making these cultural things that are implicit or that you would hear from like someone at a WordCamp just written down, like just write it down. And I actually have discovered this at Automattic, like with longtime people at Automattic, this happens, like the same problem happens everywhere. I think it's a function of remote work. And I think part of what you're describing is, you're doing this on top of your business. You're doing this on top of maybe you run 3 plugins, like whatever it is, whatever your situation is. Automaticians who work in the community have the benefit of doing this full time. And I can tell you, it's a big responsibility. Like, how do I share just enough information where it's not overwhelming, where there's a really good signal to noise ratio? I think about this a lot with the outreach program. Because like in truth, I could share something every day and it would be so overwhelming. No one would keep up. Everyone would be drowning. So it's like, how do I see people's time as like extremely precious and offer many ways for people to engage, rather than just like, barreling through. It's like, how do we bring people with us, even if it means we have to walk a little bit slower, or we have to build a couple more ramps. I think about that a lot with this kind of stuff. And I think those of us, across different companies like Yoast or Bluehost, where you have full-time contributors, we all think about this. And I know there's the idea of like duty of care. And that comes to mind a lot is, we have a duty to the people who have less time than us to make sure our PR descriptions are super clear, where they're not having to read 10 paragraphs about something or click on 5 different PRs to figure something out, which quite frankly, I do most weeks. Like, I feel like I spend a lot of time doing that. And we have a lot to improve there. Tied to this, a lot of it, I know recently, a lot of discussions come up around like dev tooling. And especially when it comes to things with the block editor, it's like, how can we make it so easy so that there are those entry points that developers have always loved about WordPress? And I think there's a lot of, I'm very excited because like people like Helen or Mark Jakewith, like Riyadh, like there are people who are starting to actually like put things in place. Ryan Welcher, who's also a new developer relations wrangler at Automattic, chimed in on an issue about block creation documentation, like creating more technical, like complex resources there. So I think there's a level of when you are an automatician, I think a lot about foundation building. And like, even if for the first year, no one shows up and it's just me being consistent foundation building, that's fine. And that's what the outreach program was. It started in May, but we didn't actually start until December. So like between that time, there was a lot of just like consistent, like, kind of like if you build it, maybe they'll come, but also like working transparently and wanting to bring other people along with me. And I think that that's a key part of what I think about every single day. Like, how do we move? I think Josefa says this a lot. How do we move fast enough to stay relevant, but slow enough to be ethical? And so I think one thing I've been thinking a lot about is with WordPress releases, it's like we're relying a lot on sponsored contributors right now. I don't think that surprises anyone. If you can go look at the credits for each release. And with COVID, that's getting like not worse and worse, but it's becoming more apparent. So it's one of those things where I'm like, man, do we release less features? But then that impacts the users. And like that could, let's say you have like an enhancement that could save an hour of everyone's time. I mean, across 42% of the internet, like what's the ethical move here? And how do we do things so that there's a really firm track record? So when someone can have the time again, they can catch up. But yeah, I don't know. I think about this stuff a lot. I don't have necessarily like perfect answers, but I do, in my day-to-day actions, try to live that out of foundation building, creating pathways for different people, and making sure that everything I'm doing is well documented.
Yeah, there's a lot of tension there because you have like, I think you're right that it boils down to the time, right? I would assume that, somebody at Yoast who's a full-time contributor, right? And like, that's their career and their job. They stay plugged in or they're able to feel a much more part of that community. But when you have, a business that you're running, right, and you're going through your QuickBooks and reconciling stuff and trying to pay your taxes and make your payroll and all of that stuff, like being able to like carve out the time to invest in WordPress, it's a precious commodity.
And I can tell you, my brother, my dad, my uncle, they're all small business owners. So like I am very familiar with that. I mean, yeah. And it's something I talk to my dad a lot about because he'll call me complaining about WordPress stuff. And I can explain it to him all day, but like he's like, no, this is a detriment in this way. I'm like, cool, let's talk about this more. So yeah, I think what the best thing we can do is make it really easy to engage when you want to. And I'll actually send you all a post afterwards, but I wrote something called like ways to keep up with full site editing that offered like, if you can only spend 10 minutes a month, here's the thing to follow. If you can only spend like kind of just different scales of detail. Because I think making those communication pathways really clear, especially because to be honest, the Make network is really cumbersome to figure out. Like the Make blogs are not always great. So like, how can we make sure everything's tagged properly? How can we make sure there's like very clearly, like, this is where you can find this information. And I'll send that to you all later.
Right, I think we're going to wrap up the podcast part of the show. I've lost track of time, but I think we're getting close to the 30 minutes, hopefully. Hopefully you're okay to stay on for another 15 minutes, aren't you, Anne?
Totally
that'd be great. You'll be able to watch everything and the bonus content on the WP-Tonic Facebook page and YouTube channel. Also, if you want to join us tomorrow for the WP-Tonic show, you won't be watching it because you'll be next week. Well, next Friday, put it that way. If you want to join us on the WP-Tonic Roundtable show, please join us. But you can watch that live on the WP-Tonic Facebook group page. Just do a search, WP-Tonic Mastermind Group, and sign up, and you'll be able to join us, ask questions, and be part of the roundtable show and the bonus content. It's a rather outrageous show, but very enjoyable. My language gets outrageous as well. That's why Stephen won't join us anymore. So no, I'm only kidding, folks. So Anne, how can people find out more about you, what you're up to at Automattic, and your words of wisdom, Anne?
Probably just nomad.blog. I am a big believer in connecting one-on-one with people. I am pretty introverted, but I love talking to folks. So if you ever have a topic you want to talk about, I don't have all the answers, but I can find them, is what I like to say. So just at Anne Zazu on WordPress.org Slack is probably the easiest way. And then just my site, nomad.blog. I share a lot of, it ranges from, mental health to WordPress to like travels I've been on to photography. It's pretty all over the place. So fair warning.
Sounds like me. It sounds like me as well. Stephen, how can people find out more about you and your what's going to be renamed company? So how do they find out more?
Currently, you can head over to zipfish.io or hustlefish.com as they kind of get merged together here.
Well, how exciting. You're going to have to maybe do a special and tell us all about this in October. It's been a great show, folks. Like I say, go over to the WP-Tonic Facebook page or YouTube channel to see the rest of this great interview with a great WordPress individual, and McCarthy. We'll see you soon, folks. Bye. So, bonus content, and on a slightly more serious and downer beat, but I think these things got to be discussed, haven't they, Anne? I'm English, so I'm always a bit
I'm here for it.
I liked your observation, in some ways, we're about community and about community online, but the environment for various factors of communities online have seemed to have become a bit toxic in general, and, Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, forums, it seems to have affected everywhere, where because of technology and for business reasons, that maybe that toxicity has been encouraged, but it's also affected the WordPress community. I was aghast to hear at how certain women or people in the WordPress community that were volunteers were being spoken to and literally threatened by developers and people in the WordPress. It was a bit of a wake-up call and a bit of a shock. How has this been discussed in Automattic, and were you shocked when this came to light?
I mean, this is going to sound bad, but like as a young queer person in tech and woman in tech, like it doesn't surprise me. I've experienced it myself in my own career. Thankfully not at Automattic. I feel very fortunate. I actually came in very jaded after a very rough San Francisco startup experience. And so I came into Automattic very intent to stir the pot and to flush out. I'm like, if you have a problem with this, like I want to know now so I can leave because I'm not doing this anymore. But I have seen it in the WordPress space. I mean, I've had people say stuff to me in the WordPress space that's really surprising. And I think what it is for a lot of people, it's surprising for some folks because like you don't hear it in a group. It's often in an isolated setting. And I think that's the trickiest part is it's like, oh, I never thought someone would say that, like that doesn't seem to make sense, but it's just context changes. But yeah, I think this is something that's reflective of tech in general. And I think a lot of it comes from a place of, everyone's trying to belong, right? Even those putting other people down, there's a lot of research around othering folks. You define yourself by othering. And I think we see that at play. And one of the things I've been really fascinated by recently that I'm actually really worried about in terms of open source, I'm both worried about and like optimistic. I don't know if you all have heard the term like the cozy web. Has that been something that, so the idea is like, it's like
it sounds lovely, but I'm sure it isn't because you're
I get way too into
it. The title sounds delicious, doesn't it?
But what I'm describing, you'll quickly be like, oh yeah, I probably like just as I'm describing this stuff, let me know if this is something that you all have increased your user base of. But like newsletters, so Substack, things like that, Telegram, group messaging, like anything group messaging related, WhatsApp, like all that sort of stuff. Newsletters, isolated. I'm trying to remember. There's like another good example that I'm forgetting right now. But the whole idea is basically like rather than existing, like Discord servers, that's the other big one is like Discord. So like rather than existing on the open web, rather than having these like connections with other people, we're creating what like this person termed, who I have no idea what their name is because that's not how my brain works. We're creating these cozy webs for ourselves. So like before, Facebook would create groups and you'd have your own bubble there. And I don't know if you all remember, but like, I think 4 or 5 years ago, Mark Zuckerberg came out and said that they were purposely focusing on, must have been 5 years ago, focusing on.
I'm not going to embarrass you, but because I leave this to the Friday show, my rant. I'm not a great fan of the great Mark.
Oh, neither am I. Oh, I think it's awful. Yeah, no, I'm not. I haven't been on Facebook in years. Like I am the worst millennial, as I said.
I use it because I'm a hypocrite.
It's streaming on Facebook right now.
And I use it, but like I use Apple. I'm not a great fan of Tim Cook and Apple, but I use all Apple products. But I feel that I'm aware of the reality of Apple.
Yeah, and they push people to that. Like that's what's scary is like a lot of these groups realize like, oh, people want these cozy spaces. So like we're gonna focus on private messaging. And that's what happened. And then it's really hard to moderate private messaging. It's really hard to know what's going on. And then you see a rise of extremism across the political spectrum. And it's super interesting because now we're recreating them for ourselves. Like at first the tech companies were doing it for us. And now we're like doing it to ourselves, which is very interesting.
Yeah, before I bring Stephen in, I run a support focused on learning management systems, and we provide hosting. And I had a client approach me, and she is a client, and she wants to build a community. She wants to use BuddyBoss, and we're hosting it. She is in the space of quasar right wing. Where she's got quite a large following on Facebook, over 16,000, and they just discuss don't get vaccinated, other quasar things, which I just feel are totally bonkers. So she came on board, and I had a discussion, and I laid out very strict parameters, and if you are caught engaging in hate speech, you're off. There won't be no yes, if, maybe. You're going to be kicked off my hosting. If we catch you, if you are encouraging acts of political violence, you're off, right? You're out. If you're encouraged like sexism, whatever, you're aiming at minorities, and some of her content, it's a debate, but I have a clear line in my own mind. I told you, you're going to be off, you know. So she clearly understands the boundaries, because I didn't mince my language, Anne. But I also feel, and some of my employees questioned my decision, because I have a couple individuals that work for me that are gay, and they really, really don't like this lady's positions. And I said to her, I've said to them, if you really believe in freedom and free speech, it's not, the mark is not defending what you like. The point is defending people's views that you don't like. But it's difficult because there is a boundary where it is just hate speech, isn't it? Do you struggle yourself?
No, I actually wrote a ridiculously long blog post about this after the US president got banned from Twitter, like, because it was like, whoa, hold on, like, because there are implications here. Like, there are queer people who have been banned from platforms, mass removed. Like, there's a lot of, including Tumblr, which is one of, like, whenever they banned porn, there was a lot of LGBTQ people who got impacted by that, who were artists, and that's like well documented, So it's a very interesting thing when you start digging into this stuff. And to be honest, what you're describing, I think, is the fight of the current tech world. I mean, Section 230 and everything going on with that is going to be wild. Like, I don't know where that's going to end up. And I think one of the things that I fear more than anything else is that we are going to get better and better at sectioning ourselves off, causing more extremism, so that you don't even have an algorithm popping in new information, right? Like, I think about when I first got on the internet, like, one of my favorite things was I was just like learning new stuff all the time. But like, when I go to my news feed, I'm like,
a wonder. Like, it's like that Aborigine term when you go on to, I forgot what it's called, when you go off into the bush. Wonder. It was a bit like that on the internet, wasn't it? You just went on 3 hours.
Better for worse. Like
3 hours later, you ain't done anything, and you've ended up somewhere totally where you didn't want to go.
And like, this is one of the things that's interesting is like, there are some platforms who are experimenting with ways to like interject some serendipity and some like, just let's see how you feel about this new thing. But all of it is engaged back into what keeps you engaged. And it's either like the same content you're used to seeing, or it's like the really fiery stuff that's going to piss you off. And it's just a weird world we're living in. And I think I have a couple different tactics that I try, where I'll read some different newspapers that are written in English in different countries that talk about some stuff that happens in the US. Those are one of the tips I got picked up on in a social movements class I took in college, is like, don't just view it from your own country, look at what other countries are saying and try to get a broader perspective. And I think we need to do that now. So one of the things, my parents and I are very different politically, and my mom in particular, we can send each other articles about a topic that comes up. And, we'll say like, hey, this article really reflected my point of view on this. Send me one of yours, and then we'll talk about it. And I think I just fear disengagement. I fear that we're going to like put the fences up virtually, and we won't engage with each other.
You got to agree when to disagree to some degree. Over to you, Stephen.
I think it's interesting how this conversation just like is tangential to like WordPress and GPL licensing and all of that. Like, I'm producing something for somebody else that they can use in whatever way they want, whether I agree with that way or not. But the idea that if we're all working and we're all producing the stuff that people can use, that the world as a whole is going to get better, and it gets better as people use it more and more. Which brings me to like, I guess, a question about WordPress itself too. WordPress is like continuing to grow and climb in the amount of people that are using it across the entire internet. which means it's being used for many different purposes. Some that are way larger than probably WordPress should be, right? Like some really complex type stuff. People are using it for terrible, horrible things, and some very lovely and beautiful things. Do you think as WordPress grows and grows and becomes more and more and more mainstream, does WordPress like retain the beauty of what WordPress was when it was like a niche little thing that everybody was just really in love with and passionate with it? Or as it gets,
I'm having a bad effect on you, Stephen. Your questions are getting bigger than mine now.
And these are the things that I like lay in bed at night and think about.
I do
and
too.
I feel like you'd have an interesting context for that, because you're looking at it from a slightly different angle or place than what I'm looking at it from, because I'm just looking at it from like, as a plugin developer, like it's like, oh, more people is better. But if you escape that business sphere, that all of a sudden, like sometimes more people is not always better, because then you have to support that, and you have to allow your platform to be used by whoever for whatever.
And I mean, that's I can tell you, I had a very intense conversation with some folks about this when I first joined Automattic, because it all of a sudden hit me where I was like, what? Like I was like 22 at the time, and I was like, what? Like how? I didn't know and all of a sudden I really thought about it. And I was at like the Lesbians Who Tech conference, where there was a WordPress site that spread a bunch of misinformation. Pretty sure there was an anti-vax site that spread a bunch of misinformation, so it is one of those things where I feel this very deeply. And I think not even the saving grace, but like when you talk about keeping it cool and niche and all that sort of stuff, I think the way that needs to be done is by really embracing the open source. Like I think if it gets through to anyone about anything related to WordPress, it's the open source part. And I like preach this to my friends, like literally they're like, "And shut up about open source." But I really do think, and this is in our Automattic's creed, is like open source is one of the greatest ideas of our generation. And I do think when we think about, the vaccine, the only reason we were able to get the vaccine as fast as we were is because some folks in China who were studying the virologists released it. They open sourced it, which gave us access to help save millions of people. It's one of those things where when you think about open source as an idea and a concept, I think that can stay both niche and scaled. And I hope that spreads. I think that, to be honest, like I've been thinking about this with different products at Automattic, and like, especially with Gen Z, there's a lot of research coming out that they don't love the slick brands that don't really have personality, that are like overly targeted to them. It's creepy. And there's a creep factor. It's called like the Canny Valley, where it's like almost too real. And you're like, ooh, it's so real.
This is education for me, and you're
I'm a nerd. I'm a huge nerd.
You're coming out these terms.
I know. Uncanny Valley is fascinating. Like it's so interesting, because you're basically like, it's so almost real that it's so obvious that it's not, and you're like freaked out by it. I worked in a mind perception and morality lab, and we would talk a lot about this. And it's so interesting because I'm noticing that with like some of these tech apps where it's like, my friend picked up her phone the other day and it was like, hey, it's only 10 minutes to drive to Anne's place. And we both were like, ew, like gross. Where open source is never going to be that clever. Like it's not. Yeah. So like, if we can lean into that, is like, it's not going to be that clever, but we're also not going to be creepy. Like it's also, we're not going to be tracking you. We're not going to block you because of whatever. Like, I think that's an interesting way to stay niche and scaled. So
right, we better wrap it up. All I've got to say, Anne, is I've really enjoyed this conversation. You've been a delightful guest. Hopefully you agreed to come back in the new year.
I'd love
another chat. I think it's been a great show, and we've covered a lot of interesting stuff. We're going to end it now, folks, and we'll be back next week with hopefully another great guest. I won't be around next week. Stephen, I've got Stephen will be sharing it with Andrew Palmer next week. We've got a great guest though. Andrew's going to be running things, so Stephen won't have to do it all because he's busy, but I'm sure you'll get on with Andrew much better. He's a much better host than me, Stephen. So, I don't know about that. No, we'll soon find out, won't we? We'll see you next week, folks. Bye.